The Varangians or Variags was the name given by Greeks and East Slavs to Vikings, who between the 9th and 11th centuries ruled the medieval state of Rus and formed the Byzantine Varangian Guard. According to the 12th century Kievan primary chronicle, a group of Varangians known as the Rus settled in Novgorod in 862 under the leadership of Rurik. Before Rurik, the Rus might have ruled an earlier hypothetical polity. Rurik's relative Oleg conquered Kiev in 882 and established the state of Kiev in Rus, which was later ruled by Rurik's descendants. Engaging in trade, piracy, and mercenary activities, Varangians roamed the river systems and portages of Gardariki, as the areas north of the Black Sea were known in the Norse sagas. They controlled the Volga trade route, connecting the Baltic to the Caspian Sea, and the Dnieper trade route leading to the Black Sea and Constantinople. Those were the critically important trade links at that time, connecting medieval Europe with wealthy and developed Arab caliphates and the Byzantine Empire. Most of the silver coinage in the West came from the East via those routes. Attracted by the riches of Constantinople, the Varangian Rus initiated a number of Rus-Byzantine wars, some of which resulted in advantageous trade treaties. At least from the early 10th century, many Varangians served as mercenaries in the Byzantine army, constituting the elite Varangian Guard. Eventually most of them, both in Byzantium and in Eastern Europe, were converted from paganism to Orthodox Christianity, culminating in the Christianization of Kievan Rus in 988. Coinciding with the general decline of the Viking Age, the influx of Scandinavians to Rus stopped, and Varangians were gradually assimilated by East Slavs by the late 11th century. Etymology: Greek beta alpha rho alpha gamma gamma omicron sigma, Varangos, and Old East Slavic varegu are derived from Old Norse varangi, originally a compound of var, pledge, faith, and gengi, companion, thus meaning sworn companion, confederate, or a foreigner who has taken service with a new lord by a treaty of fealty to him, or protege. Some scholars seem to assume a derivation from var with the common suffix ing, yet this suffix is inflected differently in Old Norse, and furthermore, the word is attested with ganya in other Germanic languages in the early Middle Ages, like in Old English where Genga, Old Frankish Wargengus, and Lango-Badic Waragang. The reduction of the second part of the word could be parallel to that seen in Old Norse foringi, leader, correspondent to Old English forgenga and Gothic foragangji, steward. Kievan Rus, having settled Old Au in the 750s, Scandinavian colonists played an important role in the early ethnogenesis of the Rus people, and in the formation of the Rus Khaganate. The Varangians are first mentioned by the primary chronicle as having exacted tribute from the Slavic and Finnic tribes in 859. The Vikings were rapidly expanding in northern Europe. England began to pay Danegeld in 859, and the Curonians of Groben faced an invasion by the Swedes at about the same date. Due largely to geographic considerations, it is often argued that most of the Varangians who traveled and settled in the eastern Baltic, Russia, and lands to the south came from the area of modern Sweden. In the 9th century, the Rus operated the Volga trade route, which connected northern Russia with the Middle East. The Volga route declined by the end of the century, and the trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks rapidly overtook it in popularity. Apart from Ladoga and Novgorod, Gniezdovo and Gotland were major centers for Varangian trade. According to the primary chronicle, in 862, the Finnic and Slavic tribes in the area of Novgorod rebelled against their Varangian rulers, driving them overseas back to Scandinavia, but they soon started to conflict with each other. The disorder prompted the tribes to invite the Varangians back to come and rule them, and bring peace to the region. Led by Rurik and his brothers Truvor and Sinews, the invited Varangians settled around the town of Holmgard. The primary chronicle twice names Rus among the other Varangian peoples, including Swedes, Normans, Angles, and Gutists. In some places the chronicle mentions Slavs and Rus as different groups, while in other instances it mixes them. Under the leadership of Rurik's relative Oleg, the Varangian Rus expanded southwards by capturing Kiev from the Khazars, founding the medieval state of Rus. Attracted by the riches of Constantinople and the Arab world, Varangians initiated a number of Rus-Byzantine wars, some of which resulted in advantageous trade treaties. Meanwhile, descendants of Rurik expanded the Rus state and unified the local tribes. Contact with the Byzantine Empire increased, culminating in the Christianization of Kievan Rus in 988, during the reign of Vladimir the Great. As with the Norse influence in Normandy and the British Isles, Varangian culture did not survive in the East. Instead, the Varangian ruling classes of the two powerful city-states of Novgorod and Kiev were gradually Slavicized by the end of the 11th century. However, the successor descendants of Rurik were the ruling dynasty of medieval Kievan Rus, the successor principalities of Galicia, Volhynia, Chernigov, Vladimir Suzdal, the Grand Duchy of Moscow, and the founders of the Tsardom of Russia. The name of the Varangian Rus became that of the land of Ruthenia and later modern Russia, and the ethnonym of its population. Most historians tend to agree with the primary chronicle that the Varangians organized the native settlements into the political entity of Kievan Rus in the 880s and gave their name to the land. However, many Russian scholars are opposed to this theory of Germanic influence and have suggested alternative scenarios for this part of Eastern European history. Russian historiography includes a number of anti-Normanist theories, antagonistic to the Normanist theory of a Scandinavian origin of Varangians. For example, according to U. Shilov, Varangians were supposed to be 8-tribe Baltic Slavs without roots to Norse Vikings. While this dispute continues, the event of Rurik's arrival in 862 to what is now northern Russia on the request of the local peoples, known as the Invitation of the Varangians, continues to be regarded as the traditional starting point of Russian history. Islamic world. The Rus initially appeared in Circland in the 9th century, traveling as merchants along the Volga trade route, selling furs, honey, and slaves. Hoards of 9th-century Baghdad minted silver coins have been found in Sweden, particularly in Gotland. The first small-scale raids took place in the late 9th and early 10th centuries. The Rus undertook the first large-scale expedition in 913. Having arrived on 500 ships, they pillaged Gorgan, in the territory of present-day Iran, and the adjacent areas, taking slaves and goods. On their return, the northern raiders were attacked and defeated by Khazar Muslims in the Volga Delta, and those who escaped were killed by the local tribes on the Middle Volga. During their next expedition in 943, the Rus captured Barda, the capital of Aran, in the modern-day Republic of Azerbaijan. The Rus stayed there for several months, killing many inhabitants of the city and amassing substantial plunder. It was only an outbreak of dysentery among the Rus that forced them to depart with their spoils. Sviatoslav, Prince of Kiev, commanded the next attack, which destroyed the Khazar state in 965. Sviatoslav's campaign established Rus control over the north-south trade routes, helping to alter the demographics of the region. Raids continued through the time period, with the last Scandinavian attempt to re-establish the route to the Caspian Sea led by Ingvar the far-travelled in 1041. Byzantine Empire. The earliest Byzantine record of the Rus may have been written prior to 842. It is preserved in the Greek life of Saint George of Amestris, which speaks of a raid that had extended into Paphlagonia. Contemporary Byzantine presence of the Rus is mentioned in the Frankish annals of St. 13. These relate that a delegation from the court of the Byzantine emperor visited Frankish Emperor Louis the Pious at his court in Ingelheim in 839. In this delegation were two men who called themselves Rose. Louis inquired about their origins and learnt that they were Swedes. Fearing that they were spies for their brothers, the Danes, he incarcerated them. In 860, the Rus under Askold and Dir launched their first attack on Constantinople from Kiev. The result of this attack is disputed, but the Varangians continued their efforts as they regularly sailed on their monoxyle down the Dnieper into the Black Sea. The Rus raids into the Caspian Sea were recorded by Arab authors in the 870s and in 910, 912, 913, 943, and later. Although the Rus had predominantly peaceful trading relations with the Byzantines, the rulers of Kiev launched the relatively successful naval expedition of 907 and the abortive campaign of 941 against Constantinople, as well as the large-scale invasion of the Balkans by Sviatoslav I in 968–971. These raids were successful in forcing the Byzantines to rearrange their trading arrangements. Militarily, the Varangians were usually defeated by the superior Byzantine forces, especially in the sea due to Byzantine use of Greek fire. Varangian Guard. The Varangian Guard were a part of Byzantine army and personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors from the 10th to the 14th centuries. Initially the Guard was composed of Varangians who came from Kiev and Rus. The Guard was first formed under Emperor Basil II after 988, following the Christianization of Kiev and Russian union with Vladimir I of Kiev, who sent 6,000 men to Basil as part of a military assistance agreement. Basil's distrust of the native Byzantine guardsmen, whose loyalties often shifted with fatal consequences, as well as the proven loyalty of the Varangians, many of whom served in Byzantium even before, led the emperor to employ them as his personal guard. So many Scandinavians left to enlist in the Guard that a medieval Swedish law from Vasa Gotland stated that no one could inherit while staying in Greece, the then Scandinavian term for the Byzantine Empire. In the 11th century, there were also two other European courts that recruited Scandinavians: Kiev and Rus, 980–1060, and London, 1018–1066. Composed primarily of Scandinavians for the first 100 years, the Guard increasingly included Anglo-Saxons after the successful Norman conquest of England. By the time of Emperor Alexios Komnenos in the late 11th century, the Varangian Guard was largely recruited from Anglo-Saxons and others who had suffered at the hands of the Vikings and their cousins the Normans. The Anglo-Saxons and other Germanic peoples shared with the Vikings a tradition of faithful, oath-bound service, and after the Norman conquest of England there were many fighting men who had lost their lands and former masters looking for a living elsewhere. The Varangian Guard not only provided security for Byzantine emperors but participated in many wars involving Byzantium and often played a crucial role, since it was usually employed at critical moments of battle. By the late 13th century, Varangians were mostly ethnically assimilated by Byzantines, though the Guard operated until at least the mid-14th century. And in 1400 there were still some people identifying themselves as Varangians in Constantinople. In popular culture, Rosemary Sutcliffe's 1976 historical novel Blood Feud depicts Basil II's formation of the Varangian Guard from the point of view of a half-Saxon orphan who journeyed to Constantinople via the Dnieper trading route. Henry Treece's Viking trilogy recounts the adventures of Harold Sigurdsson, including service in the Varangian Guard. Michael Ennis's Byzantium ISBN 978-0-330-31596-8, a fictionalized version of the life of Harold Hardrada, features time in the Varangian Guard, in the Bulpington of Blut by H.G. Wells. The father of the protagonist maintains for years the fiction that he is at work on a history of the Varangians that was to outshine Doughty. The John Ringo Paladin of Shadows series features a fictional, long-forgotten enclave of the Varangian Guard in the mountains of Georgia. Tori's second studio album The Varangian Way is a concept album that tells the story of a group of Scandinavians traveling the river routes of medieval Russia, through Ladoga, Novgorod and Kiev to the Byzantine Empire. Their third album, Stand Up and Fight, describes the history of the Varangian Guard's service to the Byzantine Empire. Bearded axe-wielding Easterlings known as Variags appear in Tolkien's fantasy novel The Return of the King. In the PC game series Mount and Blade, the name and location of the Vaegirs echoes the Varangians. Their faction have a unique unit called a Vaegir Guard. In the PC games Medieval, Total War and Medieval 2, Total War, the Varangian Guard is an axe-wielding elite infantry unit of the Byzantine Empire. Track 5 of Eamon Amarth's seventh studio album Twilight of the Thunder God has the title, Variags of Mikhalagard. Varangian soldiers are a common enemy in the video game Assassin's Creed Revelations. Russian writer Dmitry Bykov's novel Living Souls involved a civil war between Varangians and Khazars over the control of Russia. Varangians in Dark Souls 2 were pirates pressed into service of the King of Drangleic. In the Warhammer 40k universe, there is a chapter of Space Marines known as the Space Wolves that also go by the Varangian Guard. In the PC game Crusader Kings Chapter 2, the Varangian Guard appear as a mercenary unit available exclusively to the Byzantine Emperor. Bibliography: Rus Varangians Russian Primary Chronicle. Varangian Guard Strategikon of Kekaumenos by Kekaumenos. Alexiad by Anna Komnena. Deeds of John and Manuel Komnenos by John Kinnamos. Historia Ecclesiastica by Ordericus Vitalis. Chronicon Universal Anonymi Laudunensis. Japvartha Saga. Heimskringla. Laxdor Ayla Saga. Buckler, Georgina. Anna Komnena. A Study. Oxford University Press, 1929. Blondel, Sigfus. Varangians of Byzantium, an aspect of Byzantine military history. Trans. By Benedict S. Benedicts, Cambridge, 1978. ISBN 0-521-217458. Davidson, H.R., Ellis. The Viking Road to Byzantium. London, 1976. ISBN 0-04-940049-5. Enickson, Lars Magna. Runnor. Historia. Tidning. Tolkning. Historiska Media. Falun. ISBN 91-88930-32-7. Jansson, Sven B. Runsenar. STF. Stockholm. ISBN 91-7156-015-7. English refugees in the Byzantine Armed Forces. The Varangian Guard in Anglo-Saxon Ethnic Consciousness by Nicholas C.J. Pappas for DeRemilitary.org.